Hello and welcome to today's European SharePoint Office 365 and Azure Community webinar. My name is Shane and I'm delighted to be joined by John Peluso, Microsoft Regional Director and Chief Product Officer at AvePoint Inc., who will be talking to you today about Microsoft Teams, Office 365 Groups, SharePoint Yammer. What should I use and when? Remember to join the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is ESPC21. Don't forget to check out the Resource Center. This is updated daily with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. Simply visit sharepointeurope.com and click the content link at the top. ESPC21 Online was a phenomenal learning experience delivered by the top experts on the planet. Now, by popular demand, we are delighted to introduce the ESPC21 Online On-Demand Pass. At just €79, hit rewind today at sharepointeurope.com. After the webinar, we will have a questions and answers session. Type any questions you have in the questions window. Questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Center, where you'll be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to pass you over to our webinar presenter, John Peluso. Hello, John.
Thanks, Shane. Pleasure to be here today. Just hoping everybody can see my screen out there, and we'll pop on a quick camera here for me to say hello to everybody. As Shane said, my name is John Peluso. I'm the Chief Product Officer for AvePoint and also Regional Director. So pleasure to be here today with you and talk about this topic, which doesn't ever seem to go away. People are always wondering what they should be using for what, or they're absolutely sick of that conversation. So we'll get to the heart of it here. Let's get into some content and understand where we're going. So what we're going to do today is cover a few different things in the course of this discussion. I do want to talk a little bit about the job at hand, and specifically that is collaboration within and even across organizations. And so we'll briefly talk about how we've gotten to this point, so that we can then branch off and have a technology discussion. After that, I'll talk a little bit about engagement across the organization. We'll focus in here on Yammer. I have some personal stories here about how AvePoint kind of rebooted Yammer a couple of years ago, and we can talk a little bit about that story and why we did it and how we did it. And then we'll dive into the more core team collaboration topic, which obviously will bring up the discussion of Office groups and Microsoft Teams and those kinds of tools that we've been seeing such increased adoption of since we've all been working remotely in many cases over the last year or so. I'll finish up with some thoughts on what we call at AvePoint sustainable adoption. Those are two carefully chosen words. You don't have to choose between good adoption and good level of manageability and control. You can actually have both. So we'll talk a little bit about how that works. All right, let's get into it. Let's get into it by talking about the modern workplace today. And what I want to do is go all the way back to the core. So when we think about what a team, lowercase t team here is, right? In general, a team is nothing more than a group of people who have some reason or functional purpose to collaborate as a unit. And again, these can be people that are all part of my department, part of my division, part of my company, or they could be people in other departments, other divisions, other companies. So at its core, a team or a group is really an identity. And then where we normally associate technology is in all the artifacts of that collaboration. So typically, if you get involved in a new project, what's one of the first things that's going to happen, right? Generally speaking, there'll be some sort of kickoff meeting. So there's a meeting that gets planned. Maybe there's some share ahead resources for people to get up to speed on the project. At the meeting, we'll probably talk about deliverables. And so tracking tasks is something that we're going to want to be able to do. That'll probably generate more meetings. It'll probably generate more files. We will have communications ongoing, some of them within the group that are more ad hoc. We will probably have some more formal conversations, both within the group and also involving people outside the group. And then again, in any team, if we're going to really get good camaraderie and good collaboration, there should be some collision, right? Meeting people at the water cooler is the common euphemism here, but this kind of non-planned communication that helps you get to know your colleagues and help you feel more like a unit. This is all a description of how teams have been working for many, many, many years. This is not a technology thing. The technology is how do these things happen? How do all these artifacts of that collaboration happen? So that's what we'll branch off to as we go through. And this is a pretty classic slide from Microsoft, but I think still holds up very well over time because it does reflect this journey that we've been on in terms of our collaboration. On-prem, many disjointed systems weren't really connected to each other. So if I think back to AvePoint many years ago, we had a new project. What would happen? Well, we would petition IT to create a distribution list or a security group for the project. We'd start sending some emails, right? We would create a SharePoint site, but the SharePoint site wasn't really connected to the identity at all because we were using mostly email. We had a lot of files that ended up in the mailbox instead of SharePoint. Typical problems, right? These are all the classic collaboration problems that we've experienced in the past. The cloud and cloud services certainly provided an opportunity for us to get a little bit more organized and have a little bit more modern functionality. However, again, the fact that these systems in many cases were not connected and were not part of our standard information management program makes them a little difficult, right? They're also very different. They operate differently. They look differently. There's no connections between them. And then another thing that we can't really dismiss, and it's been on hold for a little bit, is this idea that whatever we're doing for this modern collaboration, we've got to remember that it has to work on the road, because once we become dependent on these solutions, we absolutely need to be able to pull up that document, pull up that information, have that communication on the fly. That's something we've classically been able to do in things like email, but until recently has been a lot harder for things like files. So this is the landscape of teamwork that we've been dealing with. And again, we're not yet advocating any particular technology here. These are just the realities of this modern workplace that we're in today. Okay, so let's start talking about this concept of what goes where and what I should use, for different kinds of collaboration. I love this slide. I think this is a good visual of how some of our employees might feel with this explosion of available technology. So our job as folks that are helping the organization adopt these modern tools is to put some kind of frame around it. And this is the beginning of a bit of a debate as well. There's schools of thought that says, just let people sort of collaborate wherever they want. They'll figure it out. In my experience, they don't figure it out, right? A small team might figure it out for themselves after some trial and error, but collaboration is by nature a joint exercise, right? So, as an example, when AvePoint first jumped on Teams way back in the preview, the public preview, we had a bit of a rough go at first because some of our key members who we needed to collaborate with didn't get the memo, weren't on Teams, weren't checking Teams, and therefore we're never getting notifications, we're never seeing things. It wasn't until we agreed, right, as a team by team agreed that this is how we were going to do it, that it actually worked for us. So I do think that a level of experimentation is fantastic. That is how best practices can develop, but there also needs to be a little bit of top-down guidance, and we'll talk a little bit about that in our sustainable adoption section. Here's another classic slide from Microsoft. It's the old inner loop and outer loop discussion. So for those of you that are not familiar with this one, the concept is that we have inner loops, and our inner loops are where we have our day-to-day collaboration. It's very predictable. We know who we're going to be collaborating with when we come to work in the morning, or we creep into our home office if we're not commuting. The inner loop is rapid collaboration, ongoing, connected, day by day. There's a progression in the way that that collaboration works. And Microsoft's suggestion is that Microsoft Teams is a great place for that collaboration to happen for a number of reasons, which we'll talk about in a little bit. The Yammer story, Yammer's been around for a long time. It's had its ebbs and flows. And recently, over the last couple of years, Microsoft has shown a significant increase in the amount of attention and investment that it's giving Yammer. And that's actually a great thing, because Yammer is intended to excel at what Microsoft calls this outer loop collaboration. This is a little less planned. This is a little more random. This is, I'm going to send a message out and I don't know who may see it or may respond to it, because this is more of a broad community as opposed to a tight group or team. Now, these are all generalizations, of course, as we'll talk about when we get into the detail on both of these things. But in general, this description still works for me, right? I still think that this is a good way to at least begin to think about it. And then, of course, we have services like SharePoint, video through Stream, and even email communications through Outlook, which are ubiquitous, right? It doesn't matter if you choose Teams or Yammer, you're still going to spend some time here in these other services because they provide the foundation. So this was Microsoft's guidance when the what to use when topic came up. Still a little esoteric for folks that have not been in the Microsoft collaboration space for a long time, or don't think about this for a living. So I have to thank Dux Raymond Sai, who was a collaborator here at AvePoint, and who put this slide together. And I think this one is a great way to give users analogies they can grab onto much better for these different services and where they excel. So cafeteria. A cafeteria is where we informally meet people, we bump into people. We're not exactly sure who we're going to see in there, but we see people, we exchange some information and so forth, right? That's a great analogy for how we can use Yammer for these unplanned collaboration points. Microsoft Teams much more is about getting work done in many organizations. At least that's how we use it here at AvePoint. And so we can think of this as a conference room, or a planning room, or a war room, depending upon your terminology there in your organization. It's where a lot of communication collaboration happens, lots of discussion, and work byproducts, as you can see all over the table here. And then SharePoint is the library. SharePoint is where the content gets stored. But of course, as the years have gone on, these other services such as Teams and Yammer have gotten better about how they expose that information. Okay, so this is a good starting point if we want to start to think about, should I be using Yammer for this? Should I be using Teams for this? And so let's dive in and talk a little bit about company engagement. So we're going to start out by talking about Yammer. Now, again, as I mentioned, AvePoint has been on its own sort of Yammer journey. The short story that I'll give you is that we had just made an investment in social when Microsoft made the purchase of Yammer. The Yammer acquisition happened years ago, and AvePoint had just put their foot in the water of using SharePoint communities back in the old SharePoint on-prem days. And we made a conscious decision at that time to shift over and use Yammer. for a number of reasons. The maturity of it as a social platform, the fact that it was purpose-built for these communities, whereas the old SharePoint communities were more of an extension of the out-of-box SharePoint functionality. We went big. Now, at some point in time, in part because Yammer just seemed to get long in the tooth, and also in part because Teams showed up, we moved away from Yammer. And it wasn't until Microsoft's major investments over the last year and a half or so that we moved back. And now we heavily leverage Yammer for our communities. And I'll talk a little bit about why that is. But Yammer has always done a good job, at least over the last few years, of focusing in on the core scenarios. And I think this is a great way to, even though this is a Microsoft marketing slide, there's a lot of value here in looking at how Microsoft pretty explicitly defines the hero scenarios for Yammer, right? And if you're looking for a guidebook, start out with what do I think I need to provide, and does Yammer fit the bill? Now, as we're seeing, in terms of employee experience, this is one that we're seeing Microsoft shift over to Teams with Viva. And so, is that a better spot? I think time will tell if Viva can fulfill on that mission. Certainly, I think Viva does a much better job of being able to surface particular and purpose-built applications that are going to be required for employee experience. So jury's out on employee experience for me here, but these other key scenarios of leadership engagement, company-wide communication, and knowledge sharing really do get served very well by Yammer. Why is this? And what are those investments that I had mentioned previously? There's a few here that I'll call out as being very, very important and used by us on a regular basis. So obviously the new UI, with all of the good things that new UI is bringing to Yammer, gives it a fresh feel, makes it feel modern. But the fact that it's this fluent design format means that not only is it looking better, but also it's much easier to interact with, okay? And as an example, let me flip over here to my next slide. This is an email that comes in with a fairly fully formed Yammer message here and the ability to interact directly with that message right from here. If you've been on the journey with Yammer for a while, Yammer did what a lot of services will do, and that is a little teaser in the email, but then a link to go into Yammer to see the message, to interact with it. That might be great from an active usage standpoint and calculating how many clicks get all the way through to Yammer. However, if I'm a user, there's a great chance that I'm going to say, nah, it's not worth me going all the way over to Yammer. I saw a little bit about this thing, but it's too much work to go interact. Yammer went the other way in their modern implementation and are really bringing the full interactivity of a Yammer community into the body of an email or into a Teams application, the community's Teams application. In my own life right now, I'm getting notifications and able to engage in content directly from my Teams activity feed. So that idea of bringing Yammer to users is new, and it's very refreshing. And it also improves the interaction, right? Also, as a community which may require some curation, right? And why would a community need curation? Well, it's because we need to cultivate the information that's there, organize it a little bit better, make it a little bit more clear where the information of value is. So moderation tools in Yammer are very evolved and very mature. So the idea to pin posts to the top of the feed, the ability to go ahead and again, curate some of those conversations with tags and things like this, right? So lots of tools for community managers here in ways that we don't see in a service like Teams, right? Teams is about the free flow of communication, not necessarily about curating content and making it available in easy to find ways afterwards. Another thing that we find tremendously valuable, not only for live events, but also in general, is this idea of a post type that is by nature Q&A. So the ability to say, hey, I have a question, which then of course can be answered, and that answer can be marked, as best answer by a community manager. This is the a concept that's been around a long time on message boards and things like that, but it just lends itself really well to this. Hey, there were 47 replies across the organization of this question. Which one is the most authoritative? Which is the one that that the community manager has sort of marked as most appropriate? This is another way of cultivating information. Another thing that we leverage quite a bit in the new Yammer is the ability to default a new post as a question. So this is fantastic because it allows me to make sure that if this is, for example, a community of interest, where a majority of the posts are going to be questions, I don't have to rely on the user to choose the right post type. I can default them to the one which is most likely going to be the one that makes sense given the community type. Again, just like we can bring great tools to the community manager, bringing Yammer to the user in the form of this good Outlook integration or a very good Teams application, this is really just a way to increase engagement and reduce confusion on the part of users. So if I'm a user and I'm in Teams, and again, I see those messages in my activity feed, etc. Some examples of how we're using Yammer in those hero scenarios. So for leadership engagement, here you can see this is actually AvePoint's internal town hall community. This is where TJ, our CEO, Dux, myself, the rest of the senior leadership team can communicate out to the broader organization on a monthly basis. What's happening? We do regular recognition of AvePoint Agility, Passion, and Teamwork Awards. We highlight successes, right? It's information sharing. We update on major product innovations that we have coming to market. So this is a great way for that sort of top-down conversation, but because there's the interaction of the Yammer community, it's not just a one-way communication. People are posting messages during the event and after the event with questions. There's a new strategy or a new tactic that has evolved of people sharing their selfie while they're watching the town hall. So there's an aspect of fun here as well. That evolved when no one was in the office anymore to see each other. And this approach for how we're using Yammer in that way really does echo some of the things that Microsoft is doing with their CEO connection, right? And again, one of the cool things about this is it's not just the event, it's all of the ongoing collaboration, questions, and et cetera that can happen after the event, right? So it's an ongoing place for people to come and collaborate. We also use Yammer here internally at AvePoint for a lot of the company-wide communications. Sometimes these are social things, right? So here's an email from one of our staff in our people team talking about, events. These are the Jersey City Family Day that we had back in August of last year. And you can see, the direct link and post over to the Yammer community. As a leader in our product organization, it's critical for me that our staff, all of our staff, our marketing staff, our development staff, our field teams, our sales teams, our customer success teams, critical for me that they stay up to date on what we're building, why we're building it, how it can be best leveraged, how we can talk about it. They have a place to go ask their questions and get answers. And that really comes under the definition of a community of practice. And so Microsoft, when they announced a lot of this new Yammer functionality, they also announced this or they referred to communities of practice. I think it's a great term once you dig into it, because it does imply this idea of informally bound people. Now, just with that, when we talk about the difference between inner loop and outer loop collaboration, the best definition of outer loop collaboration that I can find is this concept of it being informally bound, right? We're not part of the same group. We're not part of the same team. We have some of the same interests, right? What a great definition. Folks want to share expertise and passion for a joint enterprise, share experiences, share knowledge, creative, free-flowing, right? Let people be themselves. And this all comes from a Harvard Business Review article from the way back machine, right? It's way back in the year 2000. So this is not a technology thing, right? This is something that we've sort of had all this time, but have we had the proper platform to support it? Again, informally bound. And so what we have at AvePoint is we've branched out to a particular type of Yammer community that is focused on this concept of communities of practice. And you can see here some of the posts are around, in Dux's case, as the chief brand officer, Dux is sharing information around copywriting examples, largely to the marketing organization across AvePoint. AvePoint is a global organization, right? So we have marketing teams all over the world. This is a great way for them, while they don't collaborate day to day, share information and best practices. Our idea committee is our diversity and inclusion committee. And we really ramped this up over the last year or so. And there's great engagement here for different events. The team, the idea team, does quite a bit of education for AvePoint internally. The latest one I can think of was lots of great content for the recent public holiday here in North America, in the United States rather, of Juneteenth. A lot of people didn't know what Juneteenth was, and this was a great way for the idea community to get that message out and start conversation in a place where people go to collaborate every day. It wasn't an email that got buried in an inbox, right? It's there for continuous engagement. Near and dear to my heart are the communities, the product communities that we've stood up. So each major product area will have its own product community, which is monitored, community managed by a member of the product team, product strategy team. And what I love about this is the ability to really get messages out, as well as collect information from the broader user community. So here you can see we've got polls that we're able to post. We've done the default Q&A post type here. Lots and lots of best answers, lots of community engagement. We regularly use topics, so the hashtag topics in Yammer, and that's specifically so we can cultivate some of these subjects that might exist in our product communities. So here's a roadmap. If there's a conversation in Yammer about a roadmap, the community manager will go in and hashtag it with the roadmap hashtag. And then a click here goes to the page that shows all of the conversations about roadmap. So it's a really easy way to do this topic curation. The analytics and view tracking are really good, simple but really good. So I can, with a couple of clicks, understand the engagement in the community, how many people are interacting, what posts are getting the most action, what do people like to see. And it becomes a platform for training on live events. Creating a live event from here is as easy as clicking a button or two, and then we can plan the next product training. And then, of course, because the live event happens in this community, all the conversation happens in this community. So really great benefit that we've gotten from this switch to Yammer. Not just us though. So we take some examples. Let's go broader. This is Arriva, of course, a very large transport company in Europe. And there's stories around how they leverage Yammer. This is a story that Microsoft had highlighted around a community of train conductors and what a great career it could be. This is a letter from a young boy who wanted to learn more about being a train conductor. And so this is their magic moments post. And what a great way to stay motivated, right? About connection to the people that you serve. But just because Arriva uses Yammer, it doesn't mean that SharePoint has no home in their organization. SharePoint has things it's always been pretty good at, right? The ability to create and getting better at, by the way, right? The fact that we now have modern web parts, modern news, modern publishing type functions, as we've seen, starting with communication sites and rolling through all the cool things that you can do now. SharePoint as a portal and SharePoint as a location to store our documents continues to make sense and continues to have a home. The fact that SharePoint is now mobile friendly by design, if you're using mobile sites, if you're using modern sites rather. Communication sites, which have introduced a lot of this functionality, which has now also branched down to team sites, right? So what's changed in how we think about SharePoint? Well, again, we're still using SharePoint for a lot of what it was good at. The only question now is a team site enough for the work that a team needs to do? If we remember that slide with all the artifacts of collaboration, can SharePoint on its own serve all of those purposes from before, right? Meetings, task tracking, all that kind of stuff. So nothing's really changed about SharePoint. It's still good about what it's good about, and it's getting even better at all the things that it's good at. We just don't now have to put too much pressure on it to do things that it's not good at. And also, as we see with Viva Connections, we see, again, this merging of the best of what a SharePoint portal site can be into a Teams app that can be consumed without leaving Teams. So again, promising direction of trying to create some continuity across different services here where we can really pick the best of breed. If we go back to our friends at Arriva, same idea here. The ability to have these easy to consume portals. All train station staff have iPads, right? FAQs are easy to find because they're part of the portal, right? So this is a way to stay engaged in an easy way with quite a bit of customization available, simply because of the model of what modern SharePoint is today, right? And the ability for anyone with decent web development skills to create really engaging SharePoint experiences. Okay, so we started over in community engagement and cross-organization collaboration. We talked a little bit about why Yammer might make some sense there. And then we got into this conversation about SharePoint. And it's appropriate that SharePoint is kind of the middle ground between talking about Yammer and talking about Teams, because again, SharePoint is a foundational technology. In addition to all the cool UI improvements and notification and integration improvements that Microsoft made with Yammer over the last year or two, one of the other critical things was this concept of Yammer native mode, where every Yammer community is a flavor of an Office 365 group, which has SharePoint storage by default, thereby allowing Yammer files to inherit all of the information management, information governance, information security capabilities we can apply to files that are sitting in SharePoint. Just as that's true for Yammer communities now, it is also true for Teams since the beginning, because Teams have always been built on Office 365 groups. So let's talk about Teams. Again, apologies for a Microsoft marketing slide in here, but in a moment you'll see kind of why I did this. Microsoft uses this term of Teams being a hub for teamwork, right? The hub for teamwork. What does that actually mean, right? If we think about the hub and spoke model, there's a center, and then there are things which are bound to that center. And this could be a conceptual thing, but it is also a practical thing, as we'll see in a minute. One of the things that Teams has going for it the best, as I look at how it's serviced our collaboration needs, is this model of the structure, how easy it is to bring in core collaboration assets, be they documents, sites, outside applications, right, connections to other services, bring them in and make them easily visible and available to the team. This has been one of the things that has helped Teams really gain traction at AvePoint, much less needing to go out and find the information, because Teams is allowing us to bring that information into the user experience. Now, do you see a relevance between this slide and this slide? It was funny, when I made this slide, I wasn't even thinking about the team slide. And then when I saw the team slide, I said, man, you could almost overlay one on top of the other and it makes sense, right? The identity is our hub. All of these artifacts of collaboration are our spokes, right? And again, what Teams is getting better and better at is allowing you to not require that all of these spokes necessarily be first-party Teams stuff. These can be anything, right? I can add a tab to my team to expose the broad Yammer community. And as a matter of fact, that's what we've done. Just as we have at AvePoint product communities, we also have product teams who are working on the actual build of the products. It's important for those folks who are building the products to be connected to the broader conversation. And so here's a perfect example of, it's not a choice between Teams and Yammer, but the two can work very nicely together. Let's talk about the shape of a team. For those of you that aren't super deep in Teams, or even just to set the conversation here, Teams do have that hub and spoke shape. At the center is the identity, right? In general, a security boundary, the team. In this case, it's a team that maybe I'm putting together to go and attend the next European SharePoint conference, when we all are able to get together, God willing. So what we might do is we might put together a team of people. That might be a group of marketing people, some of our thought leaders, some of our presentation and support staff, right? That's the identity. And as we know, because Office 365 groups are the foundation of Microsoft Teams, this conference team is also, from a technology perspective, an Office 365 group. And then we can build out channels, right? We get the general channel for free. Microsoft creates a general channel anytime you create a team. But then we can create channels which are very explicitly attention boundaries or focus boundaries, right? So I can pay attention to some channels here. I can subscribe to notifications for some channels, but others I can leave alone and say, I'll go find that one when I want it. I find that when we go to conferences, the marketing channels are generally very busy, right? They're very chatty, lots of back and forth, because they're posting, on social media on a regular basis. They are getting quotes out. They are answering requests for comment. So very, very busy. I don't generally subscribe to our marketing channel for notifications, although at the end of the day, I'll go back and read all of the information that happened there. I will subscribe to the meeting management channel, because there are times when someone needs me urgently to come and assist with a meeting. So Teams gives me that ability to right size the information flow. If we were thinking about all this communication coming through my inbox is a single stream, right? I can choose to listen to it or not. I can choose to subscribe to notifications or not. Whereas with a team, I get a lot more control. And then to fully complete this hub and spoke model, we have tabs, which are, again, resources that can support the channel. So this might be under the logistics channel, this might be the spreadsheet with where everybody's staying and who's rooming with who and how we're getting from one event to the next event. For marketing, that might be the place to go upload your photos, or the Hootsuite application tab where we can go and post on behalf of the company social identity. So the channels really serve, the tabs really serve that purpose. So when we talk about tabs, really in most environments, the sky is the limit. And one of the things that Microsoft has done, which has really amped up the relevance of this tab model, is the release of many first-party tabs, like the ability to embed a planner or a OneNote directly into the channel, but also the ability to have third-party apps and third-party connectors super easily integrate into Teams, so that I can leverage them in message extensions when I'm typing a message. I can quickly go, and maybe if we're not a planner user, but we're a Trello user, no problem. Instead of planner, I can do the task management for this, the work this channel is engaged in Trello. At AvePoint, again, we follow the same route. Here's an example of one of our internal teams. This is a US public sector team. And you can see here the structure that we have found to work best is the one that we have evolved for our field teams. Each field team gets a team. In that field team, there are different channels, marketing events being one, partner activities being another. And here's a knowledge channel specific for that particular field team. In the knowledge channel, we of course have our ongoing conversations and our files, but we also have a link to our internal learning management system, a link to a lunch and learn planner where folks can request topics and we can triage those topics and get them scheduled for lunch and learn activities. Resources actually links to a notebook, right? And the sky's the limit on the resources we can pull in. Think about, before the world of Teams, how would I create this experience of all of these resources being pulled directly into to the user's experience? Probably what I would have to do is go to SharePoint, build some kind of team, be very deliberate about adding links, and all of a sudden now I need to be a SharePoint designer. Whereas in this case, all I need to do is click a button and add a tab, and there's a quick and easy reference right there. So this is an example of how Teams really can fulfill some of that team interaction in a way that makes a lot of sense without needing to be an expert in something like SharePoint. It being Teams, and the heart of Teams really is this ongoing, persistent conversation that happens in each channel. So the ability to have different message extensions, right? And message extensions are these tools down here. The first party ones, obviously, like the ability to set importance or to attach files, but also third party ones, like the ability to take polls, add praise, or other message extensions for applications which you may have installed. One of the really convenient ones that Microsoft just released is the ability to go ahead and create a to-do task directly from a message that I can see when I click the ellipsis button up here. So that's just an example of how these conversations can be super rich. One of the great things about these messages in channels is that they are threaded, so all of the conversations are organized. And it's pretty easy to read back. If I've been out for a day or a week and I come back and I want to read the ongoing chat, it's pretty easy to do. However, in addition to some of this structured collaboration around particular focus areas, there's obviously the need to do ad hoc collaboration with our team members, smaller group collaboration with our team members. And so the ability to not require a formal team and a formal channel to collaborate, but to just reach out and use the chat functionality in Teams to do a one-to-one or a one-to-few chat. The fact that these themselves are persistent gives us a lot of flexibility. So just for reference, I have a core team that I work in every day. It contains about 35 people. However, there's about 4 people in that team that I work with on any number of subjects. And so I have an ongoing group chat with those folks where we don't need the broad visibility of everybody that's in the team and the channel. And again, this fulfills that ad hoc, just catching someone in the, in the corridor type of communication. Notifications are a key in terms of staying on top of things. One big complaint that I hear for folks when they're working in teams in a new way is there's just so much. It's hard for me to know where to go for what. The fact that my email box is a single stream of inbound communication, yeah, it's noisy, but at least I didn't have 5 different places to go. So in Teams, it can seem a little overwhelming if you're part of a number of teams. Where are you going to keep track of things? And this is where being able to subscribe to notifications per channel is important. This is available in settings, and also if you were to click in on one of these channels, you'd see some channel notification capabilities. But we can set these at each channel level, right? We can set defaults globally, and then we can tweak them at each channel level. And that gives you a tremendous amount of control over what is going to blow up your phone versus what is simply going to show up as bold, meaning you've got a new message, or show up in your activity feed, which is how you can review all the activity, not just the ones that you've subscribed to notifications for, right? And these notifications will show on your phone, they'll show on your desktop, however you have things configured. Another thing that we see when it comes to collaboration, classic complaint was people never put the files where they're supposed to, right? They just send an email. They just, open a file, open a message, address it, attach a file, and send it. And that was the exact wrong behavior before, because it meant the file now is duplicated to every recipient. There's no centralized version stored. It's not captured by any of our file management or information management policies that we may have for SharePoint. And so this was a source of frustration. The cool thing is that in Teams, this exact same user pattern puts the file exactly where it needs to go, right? Because as long as we're using a Teams message, this file will end up in Teams, right? In line, in the chat, the conversation can continue while we're co-authoring the file, but the files will end up exactly where they belong. So SharePoint will be the landing spot for these files, exactly as we've always wanted, right? My virtual stand-up files will go into the folder for virtual stand-up. Now, things are a little bit more complicated than this, right? It's not always the case that all of the people in a team should be seeing all of the collaboration. Here are 2 examples, right? I have some management folks in this team, and I've got folks that are involved in a super secret project in this team. Now, of course, I could go create another team for them, but when Microsoft brought out private channels, it meant that now there's a place for this sub-component of the collaboration of the overall team to take place without needing to define a whole nother team and send these people to a whole nother area every time they needed to collaborate on it. So in this case, what we could simply do is create these private channels with all of the communications and files segmented and protected so they're not visible to someone like Alex, who shouldn't be able to see them. And so this evolution of the channel models meant that just like we had our conference team before, which is a security boundary, and we have our standard channels, which are attention boundaries, we can now also have a private channel, which is both a focus and a security boundary. And we can secure that from the rest of the team. So this is where we really did a lot of work with making sure that we could potentially reduce the number of teams that people were part of, because they could communicate securely in existing teams to a subset of the overall team. Of course, Microsoft keeps evolving the channel model, and before long, we'll see publicly the shared channels. And shared channels are now another new channel model. In this case, that shared channel can even include people who aren't part of the core team. So more on that later. Again, pretty easy to adapt once you get the hang of this. This was a Yammer post, and if you just do a search for reply all gate, you'll find this on Twitter. Basically, the fact that messages go to a broad group of people, then there are replies, people reply all, and then they reply all, and you end up with thousands and thousands of messages in your inbox, right? Whereas a much more streamlined way to collaborate in teams with these threaded and structured messages, which are tracking replies in real time. Again, we mentioned the ability to integrate business process here. And so the ability to use things like Microsoft Forms or Power Automate and PowerApps directly within Teams is a fantastic functionality that allows us to get that business flow in with low to no need for coding. How do we do that? We do that leveraging the extensibility points and the citizen development tools, as well as the connectors that are part of Microsoft 365. Okay, last bit, let's move on to this idea of sustainable adoption. So the idea of sustainable adoption, again, is to not just roll out the flashy new thing, but to be able to get sustained and productive adoption. And so what we've seen work really well is an approach where you're taking a really measured approach to governance. And in part, what that means, it can be thought of like this bumpers in the bowling alley. So why do we have these bumpers up in the bowling alley? Well, I don't want little Jimmy here to hurt himself, right? So we put these bumpers up. He can't throw a gutter ball, but he's playing bowling. And that's what we want our users to do. And so the more we can provide a structured, repeatable, and expected process for how we get these collaboration spaces, how they're managed and maintained over time, and also have a strategy where no workspace ever gets created without some sense of how it's going to eventually be deprovisioned, then we can make this sustainable. There's a fear, because of the model of how teams and groups and now communities work, that every time I get one of these things, right, I get all of these other tools available. That means that every team is also a SharePoint site, is also an Outlook mailbox, is also one or more planners, et cetera, right? The fear of the sprawl of this can be overwhelming. However, sprawl is not a number. Sprawl just means it's more than you can manage. And so some of the best practices that we've seen, and certainly that we've built into our tool sets, are built on these best practices here that we've found from the many years we've been dealing with collaboration systems in regulated customers, anyone that's dealing with data that needs to be secured in some way, but also wanting to leverage all the innovative modern productivity features of Microsoft 365. So the idea of being able to understand in a real way who really owns this workspace, this Yammer community, this team, this group, this SharePoint site. What division, department does it map back to? Who are the business responsible parties? What are the other classifications we may want to place on that workspace so that when we look at it on a list, we know what it is, we know why it exists, we know how important it is. Being able to have that collaboration asset inventory helps us make sure we understand what we have out there and we can manage it appropriately. This information, this inventory, is only as useful as it is current. So the idea to have a periodic process to go confirm these details. Maybe I want to confirm the data ownership. I want to confirm that all the classifications are still correct. Maybe I want to confirm that the access and permissions to the resources of that workspace are still correct, right? Doing all of this is going to require automation, right? In order to do this in a scalable way, will require automation. And then, as I mentioned, an end-to-end lifecycle management approach. These are the core building blocks. And again, we've built these into our products, but there's, these are best practices in general. So aiming towards these as goals, no matter how you do it, whether it's with a third-party product or building your own or some manual processes, this is really where we see organizations able to find value in a sustainable way. One other thing that we've seen, especially in larger organizations, a lot of public sector organizations where you may have many agencies or divisions that are sharing a single tenant, but have very different needs. And so the ability to carve up your larger Microsoft 365 tenant into different policies or service level offerings that you can make and deploy as repeatable really allows you to get that right fit in terms of how you're managing. So a few tips here before we end. First one, make it easy to do the right thing. Make it easy to do the right thing. We've talked conceptually about some of the strengths of Yammer versus Teams versus this, but we've spent an hour talking about it. Our users, they're not going to spend an hour talking about it, right? So how can we make it easy to do the right thing? Well, anticipate the needs, cultivate best practices, and then find ways to automate their deployment. Here's an example in one of our applications of the ability to essentially query the requester for a new workspace and provide them an experience which is a little bit more assistive than what you'll get out of the box. Ask them business related questions. What kind of collaboration are they trying to do? And this is now in the admin interface of simply using some branching logic of how they answer those questions to guide them to the right workspace. So again, focus on the business scenarios and then guide users. Put those bumpers up in the bowling alley. Number two, you're going to need leadership buy-in here. You need at least a few sponsors, whether that be leadership of individual teams, leadership of divisions, certainly corporate-wide leadership, that this is the way the organization's moving, these more modern collaboration patterns, super key. I mentioned earlier that our very early attempts at Teams at that point floundered for a bit before they succeeded. What finally made them succeed was buy-in from our executive team, that this is the way we were going to do it. From there, best practice cultivation was the next step. Rollout of best practices to other teams, cemented things, and we've been off and running ever since. Last one here is quick wins, right? So what are those collaboration patterns where Teams, as an example, or Yammer can serve to instantly provide value to broad parts of the organization? This is what you can do. Think of communities of practice, think of some of your inner loop teams, and get some wins on the board. They don't have to be large, they don't have to be broad initially because they'll spread. So lots more information. We did an ebook here that expands on a lot of the concepts that you heard during today's presentation, which is a free download. Just hit the outpoint.com website and go to resources. And we have an ongoing conversation here with the AvePoint Shift Happens podcast, where we have other thought leaders from across the industry, again, collaborating on these topics. So let me pause there. Thank everyone for your attention, and maybe we'll open it up to questions in the minute or two that we've got left.
Thanks for a great presentation, John. Yes, now we will start the questions and answers part. And should you wish to ask a question, please type it into the questions window now. Okay, we have some questions in. First one for you, John. As Microsoft keeps increasing the specification limits for MS Teams, then MS Teams becomes capable for all organization communications. Why get our staff using another app, for example, Yammer, when they're using MS Teams anyway?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, and I think they're referring to the fact that Microsoft recently lifted up the upper limit of how many people can be in a team to 25,000. So teams can be pretty large. I think the answer is we need to look at the tool, and because we have multiple tools available to us, if you don't have another tool available to you, you can certainly use Teams for that kind of broad cross-organization communication. Here in the United States, in our government community clouds, Yammer is not available. So in those cases, Teams are a great way to do it. I would say if you have your pick, however, look at the tool to find what's the best one for the job. And I think as we went through in this presentation, the community management tools in Yammer really are going to provide you a lot of the ability to cultivate information and make the best use of the insights that get shared there. So I would say that make sure you're using the best tool for the job, not just the one that can carry the number of people you need to carry.
Sure, and a similar question is, what can you do using Yammer that you simply can't do in Microsoft Teams?
Yeah, good question, and it's a moving target. It's a moving target. Can you do polls in Yammer in Teams? Sure, you can do a poll by posting a message with that. You could do the same thing in Yammer. So there's some things that are in common with each other. Things like the hashtagging to cultivate topics are not things that you're going to find in Teams. Sharing a conversation, an active conversation to another community is something that you can't do. And especially when you start to build up your communities of practice, you may find that you've got random posts in all these Yammer communities. Being able to share them back to the place you want that collaboration to be happening is a good way to funnel the traffic in there. Again, the ability to surface in email full interaction, we can't really do that in Teams, right? I have to go over to Teams to do it. So I think there's a few things that Yammer has brought to the table like that. And again, there's always a progression here, so we'll see how it goes over time.
Okay, last question. I know we're pretty much over time. Will Office 365 groups disappear from an end user perspective?
Yeah, so I think we already see groups sort of disappearing from an end user perspective. They're still very much there under the hood. But as we talk about Office 365 groups, I don't see users saying, hey, I need an Office 365 group. Matter of fact, now when I talk to people, they say, I created a SharePoint site. I have to clarify. I say, did you create a standalone SharePoint site, or did you create a group connected SharePoint site? So I think just the concept of groups is fading into the background. It's important as operations and technical folks that we understand the groups model, but I think for most people it is fading away. Also, as we look at things like private channels in Teams and shared channels, which are not using the Azure Active Directory groups model specifically, we'll start to see some expansion as well from a technical perspective. So I think already disappearing for individuals, and we'll see how Microsoft continues to adapt over time for more flexible membership.
Super. On behalf of the ESPC community, thank you, John, for taking the time today to complete this webinar. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Okay, everybody. That is pretty much it for today's webinar. Don't forget that ESPC 21 Online was a phenomenal learning experience delivered by top experts on the planet. Now, by popular demand, we are delighted to introduce the ESPC 21 Online On-Demand Pass. at just €79. Hit rewind today at sharepointeurope.com. This is the end of today's webinar. Please find this webinar and more at sharepointeurope.com/resource-center. Again, a big thank you for joining us today, and thank you to John Peluso, Microsoft Regional Director and Chief Product Officer at AvePoint Inc. Take care and goodbye.